Hey everyone, it's the Oxley Bom MotoGP Podcast on the Sunday after COTA with me, Matt Oxley, old racer, old idiot, and my podcast partner, Peter Bom, technical guru, all-round good guy, and a very special guest this week. He's not the most this is one of the best guests we've had that you will probably not have heard of. His name is Mr. Bob Barnard. He is the guy that gave us Phillip Island, MotoGP's best racetrack. He brought MotoGP and Formula One to Australia. He's one of the world's most renowned racetrack engineers and designers. So, we spend so much time talking about riders and motorbikes, but there's a third part of that holy trinity, which is the racetrack. So that's what we're going to do today. Talk about racetracks. How do you make a good racetrack? How do you make Phillip Island? How do you make a bad racetrack, i.e. one that falls apart during the first weekend it hosts MotoGP? So, hi, Bob. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Good to see you. Glad to be here.
Great. So Bob is an Aussie, or do you call yourself a Brit? Because he was born in Dagenham, East London, and moved to Australia in the 20s. And now lives in Spain. So what are you?
I had a period of 20 years in America, so I'm a citizen of the world is the way I look at myself.
Cool.
I've wandered the world doing this stuff, and I'm finally we've just gone past 9 years here in Spain. So
nice.
This is it. I'm not going anywhere else.
Cool. Nice. All right. And just before we get into the meat of it, I just want to mention once again, we're kind of looking at forming partnerships with brands or businesses in this podcast. So if you're interested in getting involved with us, speaking to a really unique MotoGP audience, you've got to be unique to want to listen to us. We're working with Smash Brand Group out of Sydney. If you want to get involved, go to their website, which is smashbrandgroup.com.au, and get in touch. Okay, so I think, Bob, we should start with a really wonderful story, which is Phillip Island, which for people that don't know, had its first racetrack on the streets there in the 1920s. That was before they built the bridge to Phillip Island, so they had to take the motorbikes and cars over there on boats. And then they built a proper racetrack in the 50s, which is where we go to now, which fell out of use in the 70s. It was basically a sheep farm when Bob turned up sometimes in the 1980s and thought, I can make a good MotoGP track out of that. So tell us the story of how did that start? I mean, remarkable, really.
Well, it sort of goes back to Adelaide. When, all of a sudden, Alan Jones wins the World Championship, Australia wakes up to Formula One. We went and got a Formula One race, and in the 1985, I think it was, we got Gardner to do some laps, all right, just as a demo. And I could see what happened with Alan Jones, and I could see what was going to happen if Gardner won, which I thought he would. So it was, okay, there's an opportunity here. I got a bit shafted out of Adelaide after 2 years, doing all the hard work. They said, thanks, Bob, see you later. So I had my own company by then. And so we sort of said, okay, let's go and see if we can get a Grand Prix. So,
motorcycle Grand Prix.
Yeah, motorcycle Grand Prix. And I had raced in historics for a few years when I got to Australia and I could afford it. And we used to go there once a year and literally sweep the sheet droppings off the track. And race. And the track surface was terrible because, even though they had a bridge in the 50s, it was a wooden trestle bridge. So they couldn't take asphalt trucks over or anything, all right? So what they did, they formed a base and then they do what they call a chip seal. You just spray asphalt on it and you run some stone on it. And that's what a lot of country roads you'll see is what they call a chip seal. Well,
okay.
That's not very strong. So the Bathurst 1000 started at Phillip Island. It was called the Armstrong 500. And they ran it 2 years and the track just fell to pieces. And everyone said, well, okay, there's enough of that. But, one of the fascinating things about Phillip Island is that it uses topography, and we'll get into that. It's a brilliant use of the shape of the land. And the story, I can never find out who designed this thing. The story, some stories are Hugenholtz. I don't know if you know Hugenholtz. Peter, you'd know him.
Yeah.
Did Spa, did Assen, did Suzuka, which is another brilliant piece of racetrack.
Okay.
And anyway, so going there, I sort of worked it out. Hey, this is fabulous track to drive on. All right, a lot of my compatriots wouldn't go there because the stone chips kept coming up. There were concrete patches on almost every corner. Some of them because they couldn't hold the surface, and some of them because they had some underground drainage issues, which we can talk about. Anyway, so, we thought, I'm thinking, okay, I can't afford to build a whole new circuit. The time that would take and everything else with planning and zoning. So I thought, Phillip Island. And went and talked to the Camerons, who had the lease on the land with Dr. Henderson, who turned out to be not a very nice guy. We sort of came to a conclusion, okay, if we'll get together, we'll go and get the race. You organise to get the lease for us, et cetera, and we'll do this together. So off I trotted to the FAM, cap in hand, going with them and saying, hey, this is our idea. And we did some really different things, all right? So in those days, you had the Road Race Commission. You had to convince them. And there were, 12, 16 members or something. And we translated our submission to every language. No one had ever done this before, right? So the Japanese guys going, this is amazing. So we wanted to let people know that we were serious and professional and whatever. And, back in those days, they voted on who was going to get a race, and you sat there and crossed your fingers, and we got it. And then they said, okay, so this is like February, March, that meeting they have. And they said, good.
February. So the first race was the last race of the 1989 season. So when did you actually start the process of creating Phillip Island? You talking about 2-3 years earlier?
No, literally we had months.
Oh, really?
Right?
Wow.
So this is early 88.
Wow.
Right? And they said, we're going to come back and inspect this in September to see if you've done it. Well, it's the worst time of year to actually build it. It's the worst time of year to run a race, as you found out, right? So we just had to get on a plane and go home and just start work. And essentially, the layout's fabulous, all right? But there were two corners I knew we had to change. One was what they call Honda these days, that went up to the dam. And the dam
which is
leaked.
turn 4 hairpin, yeah?
Hairpin, yeah. The dam would leak out of the wall. And so that piece of pavement always broke up and there was no runoff. So we said, okay, let's shorten that up. And then the other one was, as you come over Lukey Heights down to turn 10, Warren Willing said, the blacks will never get through that corner the way it is. Even in my car, I used to just bottom out and, take off. So we raised the corner to take the dip out of it a bit. So the only two differences we made. But the key difference was there was all these obstructions everywhere. At the end of the main straight, you couldn't believe it. There was a dam with a one-line guardrail around the edge of the racetrack, right? So all that was going to do was flip you into the dam, right? So, it's things like that. There were these two huge concrete tanks at turn 2. Turn 11.
So these were all these were like farmers' tanks for
the place was
watering the cows
farm.
and the sheep and everything.
Turn 11, there was this bullpen. I mean, a bullpen. It had posts huge stumps and posts. And of course, when you're racing, you're not looking at this stuff. You're just driving the track and think this is wonderful. And then you go there as a track technician and go, oh my God, how did we ever survive this? So basically, the track itself, we widened an extra 4 feet, I think, because it was too narrow. And obviously we had to resurface that with asphalt. And to do that, we brought an asphalt plant and put it on site because that's one of the keys to getting this thing right is the temperature of the asphalt when you deliver it. There's no point in bringing it from Melbourne. It's going to be cold. So we knocked all that other stuff down, leveled it out, made better runoff. We put the tunnel in.
Famous tunnel.
We picked up the control tower, which was there. It was from an old airport in Melbourne called Fisherman's Bend. And the club, PIAC, had taken it to pieces literally and put it together down here. So it was like a landmark, but it was in the wrong place. And I didn't have a lot of money. I rebuilt this track for $5 million. You won't believe it, but that's what it cost. That's all we had. All right.
Can I just talk very quickly about the famous Phillip Island tunnel? It's basically a tube, isn't it, of corrugated iron, and I think they eventually sort of put some steel sort of buttresses in there to stop them. But people, sort of the idiots that are involved in motorbike racing, you're driving through there. The what?
They were Phyllis bars. Robbie Phyllis.
Right, Robbie Phyllis is the one.
Robbie Phyllis.
Because he was doing what you were saying.
There you go. So basically what people tried to do was, because the circuit, the tunnel was a complete tube, was actually try and drive all the way up the tube, go there through there so fast that you could go up one side with the idea of completely doing a 360 and coming back the other side. And Rob Phillips, the famous Australian superbike rider, called Syphilis to all his friends. So he actually rolled one day, because I can remember people going through there and everybody's got their stupid little hire cars and are trying to drive up the side. That's motorbike races for you. You can never.
He had to roll it because he went in when the traffic light was red. He went full throttle in, and then he had somebody coming from the other direction. It's only one car wide, so we went left, right, left, and then sort of tried to miss the car that came straight towards him.
So, everything was done on a bit of a shoestring. So we actually stripped everything off because they had asbestos cladding on this control tower. And we picked it up with 2 cranes and walked. I've got this great photo of picking this building up with 2 cranes, walking it down the straight and putting it back on a new foundation and stuff. And we built, everything we did was basic. And I knew from Adelaide, we could things like grandstands and all this other stuff we could bring in purely for that event, all right? Because there's no other usage for it. And that's been the problem with Phillip Island. You can't invest, unless the government's doing it, you can't invest in thousands and thousands of seats on a permanent basis. So we did it. And one of the nice quotes was that after that first race, I congratulated Rainey and the boys for doing a fantastic job at doing what a promoter wants, putting on a show. And he said, you made it easy. You spent the money where it was required, which was on the track and the safety. All right. And that sort of stuck with me all the time, because that was what we were trying to do. And I was very much aware that, I'm amazed that Australia's had this race for so long, because it's a remote island in the end of the world with a very small motorcycle, market. It's got a bunch of governments who don't like motorcycles. This whole thing is like, how the hell has this thing kept for 35, 36 years, or whatever it is? So I knew we had to do this exceptionally well to keep it. Because back in those days, you got voted on, every year, which made my life difficult, trying to convince a bank to lend you some money on a year-to-year basis. So, that was the whole thing about Phillip Island. We brought in, like the pit lane crew was the crew from Adelaide, because the motorcycle guys had never done a pit lane, So I brought the medical chief in from Adelaide, Dr. Visenja, people like that. So we brought, we did a lot of innovation. We dressed them, I don't know if you noticed, I dressed everyone in colour-coded shirts. So if you're in pit race control, you can say, well, okay, there's an accident. There's the doctor, there's the chief marshal, you didn't have to worry about it. And I recruited a guy especially to be the race director, Ross Martin, because I knew that none of the ones in Adelaide in Australia were good enough for me. And so we sent Ross to get, licensed and everything else. So, and there it is. I mean, the thing is a fairy story in terms of the number of people that turned up, and it was incredible.
I mean, I was just reading Bob's book. If anybody wants to know more about Bob, he wrote a book called 7 Crazy Years, which is basically about, bringing MotoGP and Formula One to Australia and all the, and his life as a racetrack engineer. I mean, because that first weekend, 1989, I remember going there very well, because obviously Australia, it was Wayne Gardner fever. Gardner had won the championship in 87. Then he had the first Grand Prix there in 89. And it's 225,000 people over 4 days. I mean, we get excited about having that kind of attendance nowadays, anywhere, basically, pretty much.
Let alone on an island with a two-lane bridge. I mean, people kept saying, no one's going to come. And I said, what's the most famous race in the world for motorcycles? And they go, well, I don't know. I said, the TT, and there's no bloody bridge to the Isle of Man. Right? And that was my story, right? And I said, well, don't worry about it. They will get here. And they did. They came and camped. And that's how they got there. And there's one famous piece, a French journalist was there like Thursday, and we had a good crowd. We had 30,000 on Thursday. And he's like, how many people do you expect? And I said, at that stage, I was expecting 80,000 or so. And he says, oh, it's not possible. That's the French Grand Prix doesn't get that. And I said, well, suit yourself. I've sold 60,000 tickets now. So, that's good. But the classic story, and I have to tell you this, I don't want to waste anyone's time, but early on, even before the FIM meeting, Zegvard came down to
Joe Zegvard, who was boss of the road race committee, bit of a strange fellow, wasn't he?
Yeah,
not a nice, yeah.
When he talks.
Anyway, he was coming down on the Sunday to inspect the track as it was. All right, and Gardner had been testing up in Calder, and the Michelin guys came down, very very Gallic, and they drive in and they said, "Oh, can we have a look at the track?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, just drive around." So they came back, and one of them got out and he said, has the FIM seen this track? And I said, no, we're waiting for him now. He said, it is a very fast circuit. I said, yeah. And he said, they are very old men at the FIM. And they got back in the car and left. That was it. It was like, you're never going to get this thing approved because it's too big. It's like,
I just wanted. Oh no, you've got a story to finish, haven't you? I want to say something else.
I mean, that's the secret of Phillip Island. It's fast and flowing.
Yeah.
You don't need to worry about track limits and stuff because there's no point in doing it. Every corner, it's deceptive. You can go there and drive around. It feels lovely. But you're way off the pace. You just really have to screw yourself up to do it. And you can't take one corner without thinking where you want to be with the next one.
Yeah.
And what it does, it allows that overtaking that you see because people are taking different lines. Okay, we'll sacrifice this one, but we're taking the next one. It is a fabulous. And I say, I found it. I didn't design it. I found it and I improved it and created what it is. That's, I don't claim that I designed this thing. I redesigned it. I rebuilt it and turned it into what it is. So there we go.
Yeah. I think that you mentioned how it uses topography very well, and I would kind of put it up there with Mugello for that, how Mugello uses the topography of going up one side of the valley, coming down the other, and then up the centre of the valley. And, and there are two racetracks that have never needed to be, so far, fingers crossed, that needed to be ruined by chicanes. Oh, this corner's too fast now. There's not enough runoff. We're going to stick in a shitty little chicane, which we all hate. We know they're necessary to stop people from dying. But
it, to me, as a track designer, if you have to put a chicane in, you've failed. All right? And I made that point in the Byrne court case a couple of years back that, people say, oh, Phillip Island, and they're saying it's dangerous. I think you're right. Probably Mugello. There is only, at that point, I think it was only Phillip Island as the track that was the layout has never been changed. They've improved some runoff and done those things, but there's no other racetrack that is exactly the same layout. And like Mugello. I mean, Suzuka is a fantastic how they've used that topography.
Yeah.
Two greatest tracks in the world, to my mind, are Spa and Suzuka.
Yeah, Spa. Spa is already hasn't came.
Mother Nature designed them, right?
Yes.
So if you want to talk about the process, and I know you want to mention Adelaide as well, we'll get to that. All right. So the process starts when a would-be owner, comes and says, "I've got this piece of property. I want to build a track," and you say, "Okay, what are we building it for?" And I've built tracks for Akio Toyota. A short, private track, purely private, all right? Just him and his mates. And I've driven,
completely normal. Everyone does.
Why not? He loves racing. And so I've built him I've built him a paved track and a dirt track because he loves rallying, right? So, and so, you start off, okay, who's using this? What for? What sort of vehicles are you putting on this? And that sort of tells me what sort of standard we're working to. And then you look at the property, and no pieces of property are the same. And the worst thing you can give me is a piece of flat land because everything's got to come out of here. You know what I mean? And you look at the land. The land tells you everything. The land tells you where to put the racetrack. And my wife gets really pissed off when we go and look at land because I can say, look, it's going to go up there and around there. And and I can drive it. I don't use a simulator computer. I've raced. I know what this is about. And she gets really pissed off. I can't say it. Well, you will. All right. It goes up there and it does this. So the land will tell you where to put the racetrack. All right. You don't fight the land. You don't try and flatten the land. You use what it gives you. And I've got extremes in Missouri. I've got this track that's got 1,000 feet of cumulative rise and fall. It's incredible.
Wow.
It's going to be a Nürburgring, And then you get Apex, which is basically flat, but it had this dry creek through the middle of it. So we used that as topography. And then you look at, okay, what's under this? Because so if you go back to Phillip Island, I don't know if you know this, it's a volcanic island.
Oh, really? I didn't.
Many years ago. But the volcanic soils are very weak. So you have to look at that. And this is where the geotech comes in, all right? And then you get Texas Coda, which is a clay soil, and it's some of the worst soil I've ever seen in my life, all right? We had to work in that with Dallas, with Mr. Toyota. So there are things you need to do. And the big problem with the clay, it's reactive. When you wet it, it expands. And when it dries, it shrinks. So you've got this whole thing, unless you can build the track to control what gets wet and what doesn't. And that's what they tried to do at Coda. They actually dug out like 10 feet. But it didn't matter because still this stuff was underneath it. It just,
you can't really fight against geology, millions of years of geology, can you?
Yeah. And so,
we come back to you could talk about the track, the clay expanding, and so that every year we go back to Kota, the track's different, which is exactly why Marc Marquez crashed at turn 10 on the Friday. I mean, his fault, and he admitted it, but he just went full speed on his fourth or fifth lap, not thinking that the bumps were different to what they were in 2025.
But they've been there, Matt, since day one. All right? I did an inspection of that track in 2019, and they just repaved that 910 section, the first piece that they actually ever repaved. Right? So they've been working trying to get rid of these bumps all the time. And, you hit that. You can't, because the problem is not in the surface. And so you get different, and we'll talk about that. So you get different issues that come along. One, if you can't control what's going in on underground, then there are some other things you can do. There are what they call geotechnical meshes. So what you do, you lay this mesh on top of it. It's a very strong material, which acts like a hammock, if you can think of it. So if something shrinks, it's sort of pulling itself back up. And if it's expanding, it's pulling it, it sort of adds to the strength.
Equalizer.
You can add cement to the soil, because that changes the chemical composition of the clay. There's all sorts of things you can do once you know. This is where, I work with a geotech guy, because we're not dealing with highways. We're not dealing with something that's going to have millions and millions of truck axles going on down it over 10 years. So the strength of the whole pavement doesn't need to be that strong. What's important in the end is that crust. All right, because that's what's getting all the stress, is the crust of this track. And that's where you get into the specialist paving. So, so that's the sort of process. You take the terrain, you lay it out. You've always got constraints about different pieces. I've got one track in Tennessee which has got wetlands, which is a big no-no in America. I don't know if you have it in England. So the whole track is designed to miss the wetlands. It just designed itself. You had to know where to go. So you get that. You decide with the owner he's happy with that, where he's going to put his clubhouse, where you're going to put the pits and all those things. You talk to the geotech and you work out how you're going to build this thing, what sort of drainage is needed, and that gets back to Guania. You don't build racetrack drainage like you do a freeway, which is like 100-year flood or something. You can't afford it for a start. And you don't need to, because if it's a 5-year flood, no one's racing anyway. You know what I mean? It's one of those situations, but you do get extremes. I mean, Phillip Barnard, if you remember a few years back, flooded at turn 3. And I knew I'd put a pipe under turn 3, but it just got too much. It couldn't cope, so it then flows and it goes away. But that's the sort of thing you see in Guania. Yeah.
Can I just before we, I really want to carry on talking about the kind of science of because I think that's really interesting for race fans to understand what goes. But just before we get into the kind of, what is asphalt made out of, blah, blah, blah. How is it different from a road asphalt, that kind of thing. I know that for some years now you've been involved more in private pavement, which, private racetracks, which I find as a concept kind of quite fascinating, because they're kind of golf clubs for petrol heads, aren't they? Basically,
yes, that's exactly where it came from. Yep.
Somebody builds a racetrack and you pay I don't know, what, $100,000 to be a member or something a year, and you keep your Ferrari at the racetrack if you want, and then you go there on Sunday and hoon around in your Ferrari all day until you crash it or whatever, or use up the tires or whatever. Can you tell us a bit about them and how many are there? It seems to be a real growth area, right?
Well, I'm building 7 right now in America.
Wow.
Right.
Do motorbikes use them as well? I mean, mostly cars, I guess.
Some of them do, but the problem, as you'll understand, is that the safety systems for a motorcycle and a car is different. And, if you've got these guys mix and matching, you can't keep putting air fence out and taking it back and doing all this stuff. So it's surprisingly, you'd think guys with Ducatis and really nice bikes would want to do this, but they don't. They'd much rather go and ride a country road. You understand that. And so there's very little demand. So Apex does it, but only does it for their existing car members who want to go and drive around it. And I've warned them and said, look, because I've had some really bad accidents with drivers. Burn's a classic case, but I've had a guy up in Canada, he hit a tire wall off a motorcycle, and there wasn't a bone or an organ in his body which wasn't broken. He was dead on arrival up against that wall. Okay. I mean, so, they're very unforgiving for a body. They're not designed for a body. They're designed for a car. So, all right, the Private Country Club, back in the mid-90s, a friend of mine now, Jack Farr, came up with a concept in Motorsport Ranch, Fort Worth. And it was a very short track, and I actually extended it for him later. But it was that sort of golf club model that says you've got an upmarket golf club, you pay your money to be a member, and then you can pay green fees or an annual fee or whatever you want to do. And they're all different. So you've got things like Concourse Club in Miami, which is like, it's very silly money. It might be $400,000 to join, but it's right next to the airport in Miami, and it's Miami. All right, I've lived there. You've been there. It's just silly money most of the time. And then you get some little ones in the middle of South Carolina, Kershaw, which is $5,000 to join. So you sort of pay your money and take your choice, and it tends to be you get more activity, more access to the track, the more you pay. Sure. But the whole concept really is, because people say, like in England, they say, why aren't there any in England? They say, well, there's track days. Track days are different. You've got to book that in advance. You don't know, especially if you're a busy man, you don't know if you're going to be available that day or whatever. You get on a track, you don't know anybody. You go to a private club, there's this whole network of similar guys. They're not all multimillionaires. You've got guys with Corvettes and BMWs, etc. And the point is, it's not just Sunday. You can get up any day and go, bugger it, I'm not going to the office. I'm going to go and drive my car. And so that's really the thing. And then, so the whole thing is, mate, you're not building grandstands and all this other stuff. So it's way cheaper.
Yeah.
30 million will get you a country club.
Yeah.
All right. And if you get 300 members at 100,000 each, there's your 30 million back. Right? It's a no-brainer. This is why they're building it.
No crowd to worry about. Much less insurance.
Yep. And then you start selling them garages. Then you start selling them condos. Now you're really making some money. Believe me, all right? I've got a track I'm building in the middle of Atlantic City on the New Jersey shore, Barter Field, which is a $3.5 billion track because of what's around it. There's shopping malls.
For private use.
Private use.
Wow.
2.5 mile for F1 standards, can have all the bells and whistles. And it's got hotels and marinas and shopping and apartments and you name it. And it's that close to being fun. So, it is the one thing that guarantees you to make money. Spectator racing, unless you're a government, you can forget. I mean, Silverstone does an amazing job to stay afloat as a private club to do this. I mean, unless you're a billionaire like, Ross in Miami or somewhere, then forget about it. You're not going to make any money. So it is a growing trend. There is one here in Spain called Ascari, which most people have never heard of. Very, very exclusive. There's Bilsterberg up in Germany. I think there's one in Sweden. It's very much an American phenomenon, but I think there's one in Mexico. There's now that one in Japan, which is again, a multimillionaire built this stupid thing. But it is. It's and the beauty is that guys can go and have fun, and I can foresee when the insurers are going to make, you won't be able to drive your car. They'll want an autonomous car.
Yeah,
right?
Sure.
And they'll,
Exactly.
Things like that. They'll say, look, we know the numbers. They're better. It's safer with you not driving. So, and if you want to drive a Ferrari, a Lamborghini, or anything like these days, only one place to go, and that's a private car.
I think. I mean, that's why track days got so huge. Probably 20 years ago, because everybody was buying superbikes, right? Everybody was buying Honda Fireblades, Ducati 916s, and you can have fun on them on the road. But really, if you want to have a proper go on the thing, you got to, especially with speed cameras coming along and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But I mean, the whole private pavement thing is just shows to me how the sort of finances of society have changed, haven't they? The people up here have just got some crazy money.
This reminds me of, this explains probably, Bob, what you're saying there is that, I don't know if it was Miller when that was the first time the World Supersport race, or Barber, but one of these tracks, I think it was probably Barber, we were all told very specifically, every pit box, not to do a burnout, because that will ruin his favorite toy. You can't do burnouts, because I love my place. It's somebody's own property. They would just,
Mr.
you can have your World Championship race on it, but no burnout, because... It's
it's worse than that, Peter. All right, and Mr. Barber has got this incredible museum. I mean, he made his money as the milkman for Birmingham, Alabama. All right, made a lot of money. But like, if you go off and tear the grass up, he'll charge you for it. If you hit the guardrail, he'll charge you for it. It's crazy stuff. All right, and I actually did the first inspection of that track for the Sports Car Club of America, and I said at the time, it's a great fun track to drive around. This is another big point, right? There are tracks that are fun to drive around if you're on your own, but they're terrible tracks to race on.
Oh, we just come from one.
Barber is exactly that, all right? And so, that's the sort of thing. I don't go into designing a track with any fixed ideas. I don't go in there and say, like Magny Core, if you know Magny Core, you must remember that. Yep. Tilke designed that. And what he did, he took a corner from every good racetrack. So like the first corner is Estoril, then the hairpin is Adelaide. And there's always, and you can't make a track that way. It doesn't work that way. It's like trying to recreate the bloody corkscrew. It's impossible, or Spa, Eau Rouge. I mean, Mother Nature designed these things. And that's what I get back to. You need to design that, and you've got to think about, who's using it, why, etc., and come up with a design.
Bob, the way you
want to talk about asphalt.
Now, wait a second. I have another question to you, Bob, because the way you explain me your work is like, it sounds like you're dealing with the person or with the company. They explain their wishes, but I can see it also coming that you think, this track's going to be beautiful, this and this, but maybe the owner has another idea which you think is really unrealistic or really silly, and then it sort of compromises your work.
Well, it's interesting, Peter, that most of the time, I always try and remember, I always take on board what the owner wants. And as long as it's safe, I'll accommodate it. I mean, I can tell him I don't think it's going to work. And the classic was Apex. We did 2 tracks at Apex. We did one 8 years ago.
Sorry, excuse me, where is Apex?
It's in south of Phoenix. In Arizona,
in the States, right?
All right, okay. It's one of the best country clubs there is. They just keep improving this thing. It's amazing. So we built one 2.5, and we built another 2.5. But it took 5 years to get that second track layout finished, because what happens? And one of my first famous quotes, when I was doing Road Atlanta, someone said, "Do you listen to drivers?" And I said, "I don't listen to drivers. They're like lawyers. They've all got an opinion." All right, and they have. I mean, you know that from riding. If it suits your bike. Matt Mladen in those days had that rotten Suzuki, it wouldn't go anywhere, and he said, "Bob, you've got to put a chicane halfway down that back straight, because everyone's going to go by me." And then 2 years later, when Peter Dorler fixed the bike, it was, I don't care anymore. So one of the worst things that happens, and it's just happened to me on another track, and I've told the owner go away, because they go and talk to somebody, another driver or whatever, and they come back and go, no, we don't like that. Can we do this? And Apex went through this whole, and then you've got simulation, so they go on a sim and they try and drive it. And it's like, no, we need to do this. So I kept redesigning this bloody racetrack. And it got down about 3 months before we're actually going to start. And the owner called me up and said, "Can we do a Zoom call? Because this ain't working." And I told you, I told you so. So I almost went back to where we started, and it's brilliant. I mean, it is just, even though I say so myself, everyone Anyway, it's one of the IndyCar drivers, a Scottish guy. He just said, "Look, this is an IndyCar track," and it is an IndyCar track. They've approved it for their testing and stuff. So it's that, as I say, it's that sort of standard, that sort of level. But it went through that process you're talking about, Peter, is where somebody says, "Oh, can we just change this corner? Can we just change that?" And it's like, okay, as long as it's safe, I'll accommodate you, but don't come back and complain. So yeah.
That's the old design by committee thing, isn't it? It just ruins everything.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. And I'm not saying, all right, I've been doing this long enough now to know what I'm doing. So, yeah, and most of my owners are pretty good at accepting that. And the one thing I do stress, let's talk about asphalt, all right? What we pave with is very expensive. And so one of the things I tell the owners right up front is you have to do this correctly the first time, because doing it the second time, as people have found out, is way more expensive. All right. And so, as I said, it's not the depth of the asphalt. You might see on a normal road 4, 5, 6 inches of asphalt. We can get away with 3 in some instances, maybe 4, just depending on the base or whatever. And so I lay it in 2 layers, even if it's 4 inches, whatever. We always lay in more than 1 layer because, it gets better these days with GPS and all those controls. But basically, when you're paving a track, you're gradually smoothing out. Each layer you put down gets better. All right, gets smoother. So, you put your earth down, you get it to within a certain tolerance. You then put the crushed rock on top of that, you get that to a certain tolerance. These are sort of rough materials. You can't get it perfect. Then you put the first layer of asphalt down, and that takes out nearly all of the imperfections. All right, and then you put the top layer on. Now, the top layer is the most expensive. So the bottom layer can just be a good road mix. So the top layer is the expensive piece. And you need, that's an expression, like you can't beat steel on foam rubber. Right? That's why there's an anvil. Right? If you want to hit something and compact it, you've got to have something solid, which is that bottom layer of asphalt. So now you've got something to work with. And normal road asphalt is a mixture of stone and sand and binder. Binder is bitumen, black stuff. It's actually what's left when you distill oil. Right? If you've seen a distillation tower, you've got the very light crudes or light keros and stuff, and then it gets down to diesel, and the black shit on the bottom is bitumen. Yeah, all right. And normally you would just take that, and one of the interesting things is the quality of that depends on where the oil came from. Because some famous said oils ain't oils, right? So if you get Venezuelan, you've probably heard that they've got this horrible sludgy, thick oil, right? And you've got Canadian tar sands, and then you've got Brent light crudes. So they're all different, and so you've got to learn where you are in the world. Where is it coming from? And most times you'll use that just as it is with different levels. So there's different levels of strength for different types of highway. And the most common is called, certainly in America, 7622. It's a temperature range from 76 degrees to 22 is its working range. That's once you get into a racetrack, the forces that the tyres put onto the surface of that racetrack are extreme, right? If you're cornering in a car or a motorcycle, I think, get me right, I think the biggest G-force of a MotoGP bike, it used to be like 1.6 Gs. I don't know if it's up to 2 these days, but
I think they can kind of spike towards 2 on the brakes, but in the corners it's
on the brakes. That's the point. All right. So and if you've got some passengers in a car on a road and you're doing 1G, all the passengers get really excited. Well, a Formula One car can get 5G, jet fighter stuff. All right, especially in braking, like you're saying. So the contact between the tire and that on the asphalt. And these things will lift manhole covers. You saw it in Las Vegas. So, we knew that with Adelaide. We bolted them all down before we even started. Right? So the combination of sticky tyres and uplift because, if you've got downforce on the bike, it's trying to suck the pavement back up. So what it does, it can pull those stones out of the top of the surface. And I've seen it in Detroit. I was in Detroit for the Formula One race in '85, and they'd repaved the corners like the week before. And in 45-minute practice session, it was destroyed, right? Because it's like knitting. As soon as you take that first piece out, because an asphalt pavement's not like concrete. Concrete's one homogeneous, it all sets up, it's hard. Asphalt is what they call a flexible pavement. So inside that, once you're underside that crush, it's still a black viscous liquid. And if there are machines now that can measure, when a truck goes over a flexible pavement, it bends and comes back up. And so the whole basis of the design is like bending a piece of wire. You bend it so many times that eventually it's going to break, and that's where you get your 10 million axles, right? So anyway, so the inside of this stuff is still weak. So as soon as you take the top off, it's like knitting. It's just going to come to pieces, all right? Which is what you've seen. So it is extremely important that you get that surface down tight. And, there are different degrees of tightness. In Adelaide, we went to one extreme because we were really concerned about our temperatures and tracks failing. And then, but you'd have a different surface in Assen because you're trying to deal with water and some of those other similar things. So again, it's, horses for courses in terms of where you are and what you're dealing with. So, yeah.
What's the difference between a sort of grippy circuit and a circuit that isn't very grippy? Why would that a circuit? What accounts for that difference from an asphalt point of view?
It's more to do with the stone.
Yeah.
All right. One of the classic was, remember Surface Paradise in Australia?
Yeah, in Australia, yeah.
They had no grip, but it tore the tyres to pieces.
Yeah. And
he's like, how? Well, they didn't have any natural stone, so they used crushed shells. So everywhere there was these little ridges, so they would tear the bike apart, but it wouldn't give you any grip. So what you're looking for is a tightly bound enough surface it's going to hold itself together, but you don't want it like a smooth tabletop, right? So you get different. And everywhere you go, again, the aggregates, the stones are different. This is why it sort of comes back to you got to understand what you're dealing with. And so in America, for instance, I built a track in Florida. I'm just working on an extension of it now, private club. But we brought the stone from Michigan because they didn't have the right stone in Florida.
Yeah.
And so they shipped this stuff.
You have to go and find the right kind of stones, don't you? You're going to go. So you must go around from one quarry to the next, kind of looking for.
I don't, Matt. I rely on the people, right? So I'm very much. I write what I call a performance specification. I tell you what the outcome I want, all right? Because I know everywhere I go is going to be different. So I can't tell the guy making the asphalt, this is how it must be made. I can tell you how strong it needs to be once you get it out and what I want the surface to be. But you know, because from you, you're doing this as your living. So you understand where to go to get that stone, all right? And there are, and so that specialist binder, I guess should get back to the binder. It's called an 8222 or a high polymer. So what you now got is a normal binder, but they've added chemical.
Okay.
So normal asphalt, when you lay it, you heat it up so that's how you can actually lay it and work it, all right? So it comes out, it's probably about 300 degrees C when it comes out. And you lay it, and it will gradually cool off and then harden. So you have time to roll this and compact it. This chemical stuff, which we found out, is like cement. It's like concrete. It will go off. Right? So you have to change the way that you roll this and place it to make sure that you get this stuff down before it goes off. But once it's gone off, and typically, they won't let you use a racetrack for, it used to be 90 days. I've actually used a kart track the next day, and karts, believe it or not, are really difficult it's one of the few places I've had problems with asphalt is on a kart track. So this stuff will go off. You don't have to really wait for it to cool down and strengthen and all that stuff. It goes off very fast. Now it'll continue to get stronger, but it means you've got to change the way that you lay it way you approach the rolling. So it's not just the mix, it's also the laying. It's like a 50-50. And we lay it, this is the other important part. If you've got a 40-foot wide track or whatever, you don't use one paver, come back and do another paver, and come back and do another paver, which is what you saw in Goania. Right? You can see where every one of those joints was. And everywhere there's a joint, there's a zone of weakness. Right? Because getting that joint compacted and getting it butted up is really difficult. And there's different ways of doing it. The way we do it is you run like 3 pavers, side by side by side, literally, so that it's all hot. As soon as you roll it, it's all one mat. There's no joint. You may still see a little bit, but it's actually one continuous piece of asphalt. All right? So it's just not just the stone, it's the way that you put it down, the type of roller you're using, and then you get the smoothness. A racetrack has a smoothness of, I'll say in your language, 1/8 of an inch, 3 millimeters, Peter, in a 5 meter straight edge or a 16-foot straight edge. Wow. If you can see daylight under that, when you put it down on the pavement of more than 3 millimeters, right, which is like a sixpence, then it's not good enough. It has to be as near perfection as you can possibly get it, because when go on.
Obviously, the timing must be incredibly tight. You've got to bring the let's say liquid bitumen and the liquid asphalt. I know it's not liquid, but for want of a better phrase, you've got to bring that to the track in the trucks, and it must have to go down, be dumped onto the ground, and then rolled within a certain amount of time. Otherwise, you're screwed, right?
Yep.
So it must have to be kind of military operation. This truck arrives at this time. This truck arrives at this time. This truck arrives at this time.
You hit it. That's what it exactly looks like. But if you've got all these pavers, all these rollers, all these trucks, you've got like 150 men, an army, marching around this racetrack. And the thing is, those pavers must not stop. As soon as they stop, you get a bump in the pavement. So it must never stop. So you'll pave for like 12 hours continuous, no lunch break, no nothing. And as you say, Matt, having those, we had 56 trucks doing Apex, right? And so you want to make sure the mix plant is within a less than an hour if possible. You don't want on a road that's going to have accidents and all this stuff. You must know that these trucks are going to arrive continuously. And then you put it into what we call a materials handler. So it's this huge bloody machine with a hopper on the front. And it will actually take like 3 truckloads. So you put that in, and that keeps it all mixed and warm. And then that feeds the actual paver machine. So you've got this, and then you've got all the rollers. So you've got this army of equipment and men marching down the road. And it's a military operation. And it takes a lot of planning. And this is where I come in and work with them. And generally, up until recently, I've had to train the local paving guys to do this. All right. Now there's a couple of companies in America that specialize in this, which makes my life easier. All right. So,
So how long to do a whole track of whatever, 3.5, 4.5 kilometer? How many hours are they continuously busy?
We could probably do that in 2 days, Peter, and that'd be 24 hours. Now, some people say, okay, so we get back to smoothness. Every time you have a joint, so you've got rid of the longitudinal joints. Now, wherever you stop, you're going to have a joint. And there's no piece of electronic equipment that can get you that perfect. It comes down to the judgment of the guy running the machine. It's incredible, right? And so every time there's a joint, there's a possibility of getting a bump. And we know that, and that's why we pay so much attention to that. And we come back and check it, and if we need to mill a little bit, we will to tidy it up. So you don't want too many joints. And people say, we could pave it continuously for 24 hours. But you've got to have another 150 men sitting there waiting to do the next shift and stuff, and the plant's got to run. So there's the other thing, Matt, you're talking about. The plant is producing like 300 tons an hour, right? And that plant, everything it produces must come to us, all right? So you talk, again, it's this whole planning, making sure that the plant hasn't got any other commitments for those. And so, like, for Apex, between doing all the bits and pieces, and then, so you get pit lane, pit in, pit out, there's some crossovers and stuff. So you do all the fiddly bits. And then you come back and you've got 40 feet wide. That's it. And you just march down this 40 feet. So it'd be lovely to do it in one whole day. But, again, temperature is key. You cannot start laying this stuff at less than 50 degrees.
Fahrenheit. 50 degrees, is that Fahrenheit?
Yeah.
Okay, so what's that? That's sort of, you must know, Bob.
15, about 15. About 15
well
something like that.
Yeah, okay, sure. So it's going to be warm, yeah.
Well, yeah, and it's strange enough, like Arizona, if you get into, like, we paved in October, and it was very iffy, because first thing in the morning, at 6 o'clock in the morning, when the sun comes up, it was 45 to 50, right? And people say, oh, well, it's going to be, 100 today. Yeah, it's going to be 100 at lunchtime. It's not going to be 100 when we start, right? And so you start, literally you start at 6 a.m. or 7, and you go through the dark. And in fact, we finished Apex in the dark, and they bring lights and stuff, but you don't really want to do it in the dark, because these guys were fabulous. And even after 12 hours, you get these guys, they're totally committed, and they're working as hard after 12 hours. And I'm there because I watch every inch of this stuff go down. I take the view, if I don't care, why should they? All right. Yeah. So I watch it, and I'm their guilty conscience. If I see them doing something I don't like, I'll tell them. All right. And I'm quite blunt about, because you can't sort of say, oh, we'll come back and fix it. That ain't going to work. You just got to say, stop. Can't do that.
So what happened at Guyana? What do you think? Because I know you were watching that. Oh. You watch every MotoGP weekend, I think, and you were watching that one, presumably because it was a new circuit from the very beginning, from the first time Moto3 went out, weren't you? So how soon before you thought, hang on, this isn't looking good? And what did they do wrong?
As soon as I saw it, literally. The rain will tell you everything. Draining, and we haven't touched on this, but the drainage of a racetrack is very difficult, all right, because you can't have side drains. It's all got to be smooth. It's got to be one-way crossfall, so you end up with 40 feet of pavement. You're trying to drain the water off, and you've got changes in cross slope. So you're trying to do two things. You're trying to stop water getting onto the track from off the sides, and you're trying to get the stuff on the track off. And the worst thing you see is, and I take the view that if there's an even sheen of water across a track, that's good. That's okay, because everyone knows what they're doing that's expected. When you suddenly get a puddle, or like things we saw at Silverstone, where you suddenly get a hole, or you get this change of grade, because that's what will happen if you're not careful. You get this change of grade, you're going this way, and then the track goes that way, and all the water that's been down here will suddenly come back across here. So you've now got a river, and that's where we get aquaplaning and all those sorts of things. So the drainage is key. So as soon as I tune in and it's raining, and you can see that water running down that seam, tells me two things. Well, they're not getting the water off, and the seam is not level. All right? Yeah. So I know they've immediately they didn't lay this in one piece. They laid it in 3 separate pieces. So that's not good. And then, I don't know if you saw it, Mal, that was turn 1. It ran down the seam and then ran back across the track because the seam suddenly disappeared. All right? So you immediately look at that and go like, this ain't going to be good. All right? Did I think it was going to come to pieces? I didn't, because in this day and age, you think people know how to do this. And I'm not saying Brazil's a third world country or anything like that, because, that knowledge, and there aren't a lot of us. In terms of track designers and people that pave tracks for a living, there's probably half a dozen. But, people know who they are if you want to go and ask, all right? And they obviously didn't. They obviously went to their local paving company and said, oh, I had built a freeway, this will be fine. And so they laid a normal asphalt, which is why it started to come up at the end. But the things like the sinkhole, that gets back to what I call that, the geotech, knowing what's underground. Now, if it was an old sewer, maybe you could forgive them. But when I saw that first sinkhole, you could tell that around it was a patch. So that had already sunk. Okay, this wasn't the first rodeo. This wasn't the first time this happened. This ground had sunk because otherwise, why would you have a patch in a brand new track? All right. So that should have been the red flag that said, whoa, what's going on under here? All right. And I said, getting back to Phillip Island, we had like turn 3, there was a huge underground seepage coming out of turn 3. And a couple of other places that's where, the concrete patches were there because they couldn't keep the normal track in place. So, there are things that flag to you and say, look, you better have a look what's underneath here because, there's no reason why this one piece of soil should suddenly go down. And it wasn't a sewer.
It looked to me like there was a sewer. When we saw photos of the guys working on it on the Saturday before the sprint, fixing it for the sprint, you could see the kind of the top of us. I mean, and the sewer was only 6 inches, 15 centimeters under the surface. I mean, is that normal? Shouldn't the geotech survey have picked that up? Surely.
Well, I mean, if it's that close to the surface, you think they'd find it when they're actually, getting. Because I say, you start with shaping the dirt, all right? And I'm sure there was more than 6 inches of pavement on that. I would lay, the minimum I would lay is 6 inches of crushed rock, more like 8, and then 3 inches of asphalt. So you're talking about a foot that, below the track surface that they should have taken off. And I don't know, maybe someone found it and said, it'll be all right. We just, So, no, every time we go over something, I put stuff. I mean, there's always drainage under a track. And also, I put conduits under the track. So if someone wants to run a water main or electrical or something, you never have to dig it up, all right? But what I learned was you don't just normally backfill that because that will sink, right? You can't possibly get that trench as well compacted as you can the rest of it. So we use what we call flowable fill. And it's basically sand and water and a certain amount of cement so that it flows. When you put it in the ground, it flows and finds its own level, and then it sets up as a weak concrete. So that stops the track, and then you build a track on top of that. So that's my methodology. And there's a million tricks to doing a racetrack, I've got to tell you. And, so it's just 40 years of doing this. Yeah. You find out the hard way in lots of cases. So, I expect it to... I knew it was moving, but I didn't expect when I saw the photos of the surface. But that's classic for having an asphalt mix that just isn't strong enough. And as I said, I've seen tracks come to pieces in Detroit in 45 minutes. So I think they were lucky. If it hadn't have rained, I think they'd have had those problems on day one. All right? I mean, and it's not the extremes of temperature. I mean, Miami's got the extremes. Arizona's got the extremes. Adelaide had the extremes. It isn't just to say, oh, well, it was hot. Well, we know it's going to be hot. So
I mean, do you think it was done on the cheap, basically?
I don't know if that was the intent. I'd like to think it was more that they didn't know and they didn't go and find out, I mean, yes, I mean, it probably costs 50% more to lay the good asphalt. All right. So it's not cheap. But as I say, the only time I haven't done it right, and it's an interesting story, right? So we're building the first Apex track. And the owner's like, gee, this inch and a half you're going to put down is very expensive. Can we lay an inch? And I thought, well, I've never done it, so there's no reason to say no. But as soon as we started, I know why we should have said no, because you couldn't compact an inch. The roller would just shove this stuff. And so we went around this whole track. We actually did it in one day because it was only thin. We never got the compaction.
How much would it cost to do it your way, to surface or resurface Guyana? Not a long track by any means.
No.
I mean, what sort of money are we talking? You said it was 50% more to do a good job. So what's a cheap job and a good job difference?
Probably roughly? 6 million to 10 million. It's that sort of range.
Okay.
The issue will be when you come to repave the track, is you've now got to take off, unless you want to raise the whole thing another inch and a half or 2 inches, which then means all your curbs are wrong.
Yeah.
Or you've got to come back and you've got to mill the existing surface and get rid of it and come back with a whole new surface. So, the costs That's what I keep saying. The cost of doing it the second time is way more, because it's going to cost you the same amount to do it the second time, plus all the rest of it's going to be an issue. So it's it's if we're building a brand new racetrack, I mean, if you look at COTA, for instance, the pit building is worth 4 times what the track cost. You know what I mean? If you put it into context, that that's probably a $400 million racetrack when he built it. That's a long time ago now, right? And we've had a lot of cost escalation. So it's I'd say it's probably a $10 million repay. But again, it depends on what costs are in Brazil, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure.
What's going on in America. But it's not cheap, but it's not expensive against the cost of, if you built this track and then you lose the race, what's that cost you? You know what I mean? And so I'd like to think that it wasn't just, hey, we can't afford it, because why wouldn't, it's because they probably didn't go and find the right solution to put it down.
I mean, basically you've got to have you said there's only half a dozen like super pros at this job. You've got to hire one of them.
Yeah.
And have them live down there for a month, I guess.
Yeah.
Or whilst the whole thing.
You can do a track in a couple of weeks, but before that, you've got, as I said, you've got the planning sessions. You've got to work out with the guys. I mean, it's simple stuff. Where are you going to get the trucks onto the track? Right? And how are you going to get them off? Because once you've laid that, you don't want a truck to run on it, all right? So there's the logistics of this it's like you say, it's an army, right? How do you get them on? Where do you bring them on? How do you, can you back them? I've had backed a truck around the whole racetrack because there's nowhere to turn it around. Stuff like this, it's a very, so there's a lot of pre-planning. I'm going through it with a track in Florida now, P1. It's another private track. And I've been working on it for a year, talking to different pavers, getting prices, talking through what the mix is, what aggregates we're going to use, that whole stuff. So it's a process that you get all of it done. And then 2 weeks before, you were going to say, okay, we're going to start this day and pray it's not raining. Yeah. That's the other part of this. I've sat in New York for 2 weeks because the weather forecast the next day was shit, and you get up in the morning and it's fine. So it's like, you need good weather, you need good temperature, and the hotter the better. I mean, it's horrible using this stuff, you can imagine, in 100 degrees or more, but that's what you want, because then it stays just that bit hotter. But like you were talking about, you take the temperature of this material coming out of the plant, you take the temperature of the material that's in the truck to make, if it's too low, you send it away and say, can't use that. Then you sort of checking this in, what's the temperature when it comes out the back of the paver, and then no one gets on it until it's less than 100. And there's all sorts of tricks. So like the rollers and the machinery, you can't stop any of this stuff. As soon as you stop a roller, you'll get a dent. Yeah. So the rollers must never stop. So if you want to refill the water or refill the fuel, you've got to drive it all the way back off and, come. And so the Sunland guys have this ingenious thing. They've got the water tanker and a whole plastic pipe made up that they just drive along with the roller, pull the roller up. These guys are pretty bloody ingenious about how they do it.
When I hear you talking, Matt, or Bob, sorry, when I hear you talking, it reminds me of how they make a tire. Because it's the other side of the tire. It's part of the whole grip thing. Yeah. I never knew the tarmac was so complicated, but I learned recently how complicated and super sensitive the production of tires is. Just like you said, a batch of tires is never the same. They make a batch, 2 months later they make the same batch. It's not the same. I was looking at production dates to know, because I knew which was the good production date. But that's one thing. The other thing, looking at you, is now we are leaving Phillip Island and we're going to race in the city. Have you been involved? What are your thoughts about it? Do you think it's going to be a fun track, an interesting track, going to Adelaide in town? Have you been involved? Or what are your thoughts about it?
No. I'm the forgotten man. No one in Australia remembers me except a few, a lot of enthusiasts still know about me and the real guys.
But this will put you back on the map now.
The state premier didn't talk to me at all about doing this. Don't worry. All right. So the key is when I built Adelaide for the Formula One, I was not allowed to take one tree out, not one, over the whole track. And this thing went through the park, all right? So there were trees I'd love to have taken out, but you literally had to work within those confines. Now, when I look at this plan, it's going to be Albert Park. They're just going to knock all these trees out. I mean, the track isn't going to be related to what I built in the first place, all right? So is it going to be better? I think it's going to be Albert Park, and no one wants to go to Albert Park anyway. But unfortunately, this is what's going on with Liberty. There's a few things going on, but one of the beautiful things about a city track, and you take Adelaide Formula One, no one drove their car there apart from the drivers, right? There was no parking space, but it's in the middle of a city, so you've got public transport, all this, garages in town, and everything else. No one, everyone sort of got to the track, and that's the beauty. It's like, Zandvoort, but this whole thing about sustainability is just so much BS, because you're going to get rid of a track like Spa, because people have to drive there. And then if you're interested in sustainability, leave all the drivers and teams at home. Let them do it all on a simulator, right?
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I say to people, "What's the most polluting race in the world?" And no one knows. I say it's the Tour de France, because all the spectators drive there in their motorhomes and everything else. It's the worst bloody thing you can possibly do. Yeah. So but that's why. But there is something about a city street race which works. I was very conscious in Adelaide, and I did a lot of different things with Adelaide, which again won't go into about how I approached that. But it gives people a greater sense of speed and relativity, because they drive these streets, and all of a sudden you're watching this guy going down a side street at 100 mile an hour, accelerating out and driving and braking before he goes around the next corner, and it's like, oh my goodness. So it's like looking at the new Nürburgring. You need Rommel's field glasses to see what's going on, whereas the old Nürburgring was fantastic because you've got this whole scenery. So, like when I'm looking at the track in Missouri, I'm not knocking all the trees down. I'm taking the trees out that I need to, but for the driver, it's going to be a fantastic feeling because you've got this impression of speed that you're getting that you don't get.
That's one of the reasons why the Isle of Man TT is, anybody that's raced there, you'll take that feeling with you to the day you die, because you're going down a street between, trees on one side, trees on the others, and you feel like you're doing 1,000,000 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And it's go on.
Do I think it's a good idea? I don't, because I mean, they're going to get so much opposition. I mean, we had enough opposition. And then I don't know if you remember what happened at Albert Park. There were people who chained themselves to trees. They went and protested outside Bernie Eccleston's house in London. All right?
Yeah.
You're going to have the same group of people in Adelaide if you start showing them what you're going to knock over. And then who's paying for this? I mean, the state government is going to spend so much money to put this race on. They're building a whole new pit complex. You're going to be 100 million or more easily rebuilding this track. And you've got to say, for what? You've already got the Super V8s that gets a huge audience. You know what I mean? You've got the Adelaide, I don't know if you see it, the Motorsport Festival that goes on in like February. They're huge events. Adelaide doesn't. The whole point of Adelaide, the Formula One race, all right. When they went and got it, they put out a bid for someone to build the racetrack. All right. I was chief estimator of a major construction company, so we put a bid in. And they worked out that I grew up in England, went to Brands Hatch, went to Silverstone, knew what Formula One was. I'd raced. I knew a lot of people. Bob was the obvious guy to build this racetrack. All right. So I go and I sit down with the Premier's chief of staff, and he says, "You're not building a track for 24 prima donnas. You're showing off the city." That was the brief. All right. And that's governed everything we did, because in those days, who the hell knew where Adelaide was? I went there, emigrated there, and I had no idea where the bloody place was. All I knew was a good job waiting when I got there. And so, but you put Adelaide on the map. That's why they lost the Formula One race, because politicians work out that, it's just costing us. I mean, it didn't cost us anything when we first started. We were making enough money, but then Bernie kept putting the price up. And in the end, so.
There are already rumours going around that the whole thing is a bit of a red herring, that that they needed a red herring to get the race away from Phillip Island, and that actually we'll just end up going to the Bend, which is outside Adelaide, an hour outside Adelaide, isn't it?
Yeah.
So who knows? Who knows?
Yeah.
We should probably wrap it up there because we've been going for about an hour and 10 minutes. Bob, it's been absolutely fantastic. Like I said, we talk all the time about motorbikes and motorbike riders. And so to talk about, the real details about how you make a racetrack, I find it really amazing. Fantastic.
Well, it's
been an absolute pleasure to have you on here. And like I said earlier, if you're watching on YouTube, you'll be able to see this. If you're not, Bob's little autobiography here, 7 Crazy Years, all about the Adelaide mainly about the Adelaide Formula One Grand Prix and MotoGP and all it.
But in 7 years, I ran 2 Formula One races, 4 MotoGPs, and promoted Frank Sinatra at the opening century car. So it really was
crazy.
7 crazy years. All right?
Crazy.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, fantastic.
And there's the rest.
Fantastic.
It's still going.
Yeah, fantastic.
Thank you, guys.
It's been a super pleasure.
Yeah.
And we might well have you on again sometime, when there's, because it's such a rich, deep subject in all kinds of ways, going back all to the geology and everything. So, thanks so much for coming on.
No
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Sam, our highly paid producer. And, we will see you next weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye.